Local.
شك
local,
cambiamento
تغيير
جيرجليكتا
chakula ijayo
food, change.
we
We are
are. Welcome to the Slow Food Youth Network podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Swin podcast. My name is Valentina Gritti and I'm the Global Community and Project Manager of the Slow Food Youth Network. This is a very special series of the Swin podcast because I'm live recording at Terra Madre, the biggest event of slow food, which takes place every 2 years in Turin, in Italy. And I'm co-hosting with Dan Saladino, who is a producer at the BBC Food Program. And he also book author of the book Eating to Extinction. So
Absolutely right, and wonderful to be back in Terra Madre after such a long gap. And here we are in this part of Turin, surrounded by thousands of people, recording this podcast in a golden-coloured container. And yeah, how wonderful. So I hope people are listening in and enjoying, and we're about to tell them some fascinating stories from Terra Madre.
Yeah, and then outside it's really raining, so we're happy to be inside this golden container.
We've had two glorious sunny days, and then the rain came today, and so people have been huddling inside the talks and the conferences and the places to go meet the food producers. So it's more intimate and cozy today because of the rain.
Yeah, indeed. And today I'm here with two special guests from Finland and from Italy. So we have Nora Husari from Finland and Ariana Lavasini from Italy. And Nora works for Snow Change, the Snow Change Cooperative in Finland, towards the preservation and enhancement of biodiversity, cultural heritage and regenerative food production with a focus on small-scale fisheries. So now you're going to tell us more about what you do exactly. And she finds that the key solutions to the increasing environmental crisis lie at the local level with indigenous and local communities. And then we have Ariana Lavasine, who recently graduated in Law and Sustainable Development, and she seeks to do her part also to tackle the climate crisis. And you have a bit more of a global perspective because you did an internship at the UNFCCC, and so you're gonna also share with us what is the global perspective on the climate crisis. And so I know also that you really like cooking, so you like food in all its sense. And whenever you have some time, you bake cakes.
I do.
Yeah.
Did you bring some?
I think there is plenty around here today, so today I leave it at home. Next time.
Yeah. And so maybe we can start with a bit of background question to get to know a bit more about you.
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much to both of you for having us here. I'm very happy. This is my hometown. I was grown up here, born here, so it's very special for me today being here. And every time there is Terra Madre, it's such a joy. As Valentina said, I'm a recent graduate in law and sustainable development, trying to specialize and learn more day by day on the climate crisis. And this is the part where I would like to develop my own career also. So very happy to be here today.
So very nice to be here from my side too. This is my first time in Turin and in Terra Madre. It's been really inspiring to see that there are so many people who share the same struggles, but also are responding to the struggles in their own ways, in their local communities and their local environments. So it's been fruitful.
Mm-hmm. Good. And so maybe to kick off, I would like to start with you, Nora, and to ask you what is your experience really on the grassroots level on how the climate crisis is affecting local communities and especially small-scale fishermen?
Yeah. So I'm from Finland, like you said. where we used to have long winters, cold winters with a lot of snow. And my organization, Snow Change, is partly an NGO, but partly a fishing cooperative. So we have our own fishing crew, which practices traditional. It's a very special winter fishery on Lake Puruvesi. So it's just as a brief introduction, it's like a special fishery that takes place on the ice, where you put a big net under the ice with a special technique, and you spread it out, and then you when you pull it, and if it's successful, then you catch the fish. So our fishers, we have a young fishing team of there's a fisherwoman 26 years old and a fisherman 32. So they, together with the elders who they have been learning from, have been experiencing the impacts of climate change in their everyday fishery. So
The ice is no longer coming.
yeah, so I mean there is still ice, but there's a lot less ice. So for example, in 1968, the sailing season started in early November, but then in 2020, or I was supposed to say that it lasted for 5 or 6 months, like back in the 60s, but now it lasts from 1 month to 3 months. So it's like a drastic decrease. And when we talk about the decrease of ice, that also means like that the whole tradition is threatened. So we don't only talk about fishing, but we talk about an entire culture, a deep connection to nature, a deep knowledge, like an entire set of knowledge that is based on all that. And it's not just the ice, but also the weather and how the fish are reacting to that has changed. So like, so when you're a fisherman, you need to know where the fish are, where to go fishing, and it's based on like certain like hints from the environment. So for example, from where is the wind blowing, how much sunlight is there, what is the phase of the moon, and then you choose where you go out of the hundreds of places on the ice.
It sounds really intriguing, this idea of nets and ice. Can you just describe how it's done, and also what species of fish are there?
Yeah. So it's done so that you make 2 holes on the ice, like quite spread out from each other, and then you have these. Not very good with the words in English with this fishing technologies, but you spread like ropes from one end to the other, and then to the ropes you connect the net, and then with the ropes you pull the net to the other.
How do you do that without anyone having to go into the icy water?
There are these we call them swimmers. So there are those that like are really old-fashioned, that don't use any battery or anything, but then there's those that like kind of like have a tiny engine that then go under the ice. And the fish is called vendes in English, Coregonus albula in Latin. It's a tiny salmon-related fish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a very ancient technique of fishing, very
Yeah,
traditional technique.
yeah. I mean, it dates back to at least 1300s, because from there are the first written records. But it might be even older on that specific lake. I mean, the Seine itself is like thousands of years old. The Seine fishery.
And how important is it as a source of food, but also a source of employment and income?
Well, at least now when the sailing season is shorter, then that of course affects like an indirect impact of climate change. It affects the income of the fishermen because the season is so much shorter. and yeah, and of course regarding food security too, because then if there's a shorter season to fish, and of course you can fish on open water too, but then when there's a period between the summer fishery and the winter fishery that we call rospuutto in Finnish, and it's a season when you don't have enough ice cover, but you also don't have open water. So when that period is longer, you cannot fish, and then of course there is then it's a food security question too, like in the future as well.
It's the whole rhythms, really, of nature, but also of the way people interact with the lake and the fish is changing.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
And Ariana, based on your experience at the UNFCCC, how are organizations dealing with climate change? So this time on a international level.
Yeah. So, first of all, UNFCCC stands for United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. So it was, first of all, a treaty which was signed by members of the United Nations in 1992. So it's a treaty. So first of all, the way in which international organization deals with this big problem is by writing down agreements, writing down treaties, writing down laws. So in 1992, they started with this agreement, which was super broad because it stated, okay, there is a problem, there is climate change, but it didn't really say much more. Nation agreed that there was something that had to be done, but that was it. Then, some years later, was another agreement, which was the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, which it looks, I was born in 1997, so it's like, it's 25 years ago. Still, it was late at the time. And the Kyoto Protocol, again, was very important. It was a little bit more broad. It had more commitments. But the things that I always want to remind is that there was some commitments to put in place, and there was a period to do that stemmed from 2005 to 2012. The time went quite well, but then they had to do more commitment between 2012 and 2020. However, this second commitment period, how is it called, was ratified, was signed in 2020. So on the day that this commitment period should have finished, so in the years that they had to do something, actually it entered into force. So it actually was a failure. Then it came with the Paris Agreement in 2015 in COP21, and this is another, it's, let's say, a landmark in the scenario of international organization and the way in which this international organization tried to deal with climate change, because as we all know, for the first time it set some binding targets for nations. Some things that basically says that there are some legally binding targets, meaning that states who ratified these agreements are bound by law to do something. First time, 2015, quite late. So to answer your question, Vale, this is the primary way in which international organizations deal with, by writing down what they have to do. Then the question, if they actually do what they write down, well, that is another story. And but from my little experience, I saw that these multilateral processes, marked by cooperation, diplomacy, are very important, because we have something written down, but at the end, which is very important, and this organization help to steer the process, to keep these issues up on the agenda. But at the end of the day, are very, very slow processes with a lot of, indeed, cooperation and diplomatic issues going on. So I saw a very slow process, and I felt that maybe the most impact can be done on a local level. So yeah, slow processes.
Yeah. And is food in any part, like mentioned within this treaty or this agreement, does it have a role?
I mean, it's an important question, because agriculture and food is impacted by climate change. So we know that the rise in temperature creates food loss, creates a problem of food security, biodiversity loss, droughts and floods, so problems to growing food. On the other hand, also agriculture, so the agricultural sector is a contributor to climate change, so there is a two-way process. If we imagine the industries that impact climate change, the impact global warming, agriculture and food stems for 24%. If we look, for example, at the transportation, it's only 14%, so it has a big impact. But if we look at these treaties that I just mentioned there is no specific instrument for food and agriculture. There is only a mention that yes, this is also a sector that needs to be tackled, but there is nothing more. We know there is the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, that does its part, but in these big treaties that tackle climate change, food is something that they seem to have forgotten. There is not a specific mention. There are some more specific instrument. There is an agreement that was made in 2017, but again, it's a piece of paper to say, okay, let's gather information on food and agriculture. Let's produce knowledge on this. But as I said before, it looks like food and agriculture is not on top of the agenda, and it's a problem since there is this two-way impact. Climate change is impacting agriculture, but agriculture impacts climate change. So there's a lot of work to do, I think.
And it's been such a dramatic year with flooding in Pakistan, the record-breaking temperatures in India, drought across Europe as well.
Yeah, exactly, and this makes you think. Also, we know with the war in Ukraine, also the problems with wheat, for example, and everyone is speaking about food security. But if we want to come up with a word that we're seeing a lot around Terra Madre, which is regeneration, agriculture is impacting climate change. But if we change the way in which we cultivate, we have a more regenerative approach to agriculture, we actually wouldn't have these food security problems, and we could actually make this two-way process beneficial for climate but also for agriculture. So it would just need a change in the way we cultivate. We wouldn't need a reduction in we don't need to cultivate less, we just need to do it differently. Yeah.
And do you think food is, possibly because of the things we've just listed, food is going up the agenda? Because I was certainly surprised and disappointed that at the last COP there was very little evidence that food was a subject of importance in the big scheme of things.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said before, it looks like they forgot about food, the food system. In the months that I was an intern at the Unfcc, I never heard once mentioning food. Not even with the people that I was with the division of the executive secretary. So it was Patricia Espinosa, which is a diplomat, and she was the chair until some months ago. She is now retired. Never heard in their meeting mentioning food.
Have you figured out why? It's so. I mean, obviously we're here at Terra Madre. We're all so engaged, but I'm curious as to what is it that global institutional level that means food is in the background.
Yeah, I think they're much concerned with fossil fuels and how with that industry first. So also the major stakeholders and multinationals that have the power. Also in the multilateral processes of climate change are the fossil fuels companies, and also agriculture. There are a lot of multinationals that have power, but also a lot of small producers who don't have a voice, I think. So I think the problem is that they are very much focused on, rightfully also, on trying to tackle the issue of climate change by reducing the dependencies on fossil fuels, because there is where money is and where the power is. I think this is how I read things now.
Fossil fuels are also used in agriculture.
Exactly. Yeah.
Should be.
Still no mention of food.
Yeah. Okay. And getting back to the grassroots level, Nora, how do you? What are the instruments that you can offer, for example, with snow change to tackle climate change?
Yeah, so we're trying to affect the land use. So we have a landscape restoration program called landscape rewilding. So maybe just a little bit of background to the context of Finland. So many people probably know that we have a lot of forests, lakes, rivers, and then peatlands. I don't know if everyone knows what a peatland is, but they are very old, flat, moist, wet lands with a lot of moss. At this time of the year, the mosses are in different colors: red, green, purple, brown, and they are special biodiversity hotspots because you can't find those species anywhere else, and also they are gigantic carbon sinks. They are more effective carbon sinks than forests in fact. So in Finland, people might view our country as like a green, environmentally um, like a green country, but it's not quite true. So when it comes to peatlands, the major part of them have been either ditched for forestry purposes. So you're trying to convert a peatland into a forest by planting tree, like drying it, so that you can plant trees and then log them. Or then the peat has been extracted for energy production. So you basically take all the vegetation off, dig the peat, burn it for energy, and then like the entire ecosystem is
It's gone.
yeah. So we're trying to respond to that by restoring those peatlands and restoring them back to carbon sinks and biodiversity hotspots. And I have one concrete example that I'd like to share. So there's one peatland called Linnunsuo, close to where I live. It's a peatland of birds. So there used to be a lot of birds. And when the peat mining company came in the 80s and started extracting peat, there were only two bird species left. And then what happened was that in 2010, a local fisherman noticed that there were dead fish in the nearby river. And people started wondering what's going on. They were like, maybe it's something to do with the peat mine. But the authorities didn't really want to pay attention. But then the same thing happened in 2011. And then the local communities of the two villages of Selki and Alavi, and then Snow Change decided that, okay, like this can't go on, we have to do something. So they started a huge campaign, and then actually found out that, okay, well, the fish died because of acidic discharges from the peat mine. So then after like a long battle, a community-led battle, the peat mining ended, and then Snow Change managed to purchase the land with a big loan and start the restoration process. So then that happened 10 years ago, a little bit more than 10 years ago. And then after those, like that long restoration process, we now have like a recovering peatland. Well, it's not a peatland, or I mean, it's a peatland, but it's not close to anywhere. Like throughout our lifetime, it won't be what it was, but it's a wetland, and there's now been detected 196 bird species, which is a huge difference to the 2 bird species that there were before. And it's returning into a carbon sink. Like we actually measure the carbon emissions, so it's recovering, because when you have a peat mining site, it's like it's emitting carbon every day, and then now it's kind of recovering to be back, like to become
And how did Snow Change begin, and what did it become in terms of scale?
like
How many? Yeah, I mean, was it just a few individuals, or was it a community based organization?
Yeah, so it started more than 20 years ago from a student project in Finland. So there was a group of people, a group of students that were worried about climate change, and then they thought that maybe we should look back to the elders and their knowledge to kind of collect the traditional knowledge and the observations of climate change. And then it was like a collaboration between a university in Russia and a university in Canada. So then they started these exchange visits to different communities, and then it kind of like grew from there, so that more and more communities wanted to be involved, and then it's kind of became a network of indigenous and traditional communities.
And who or what did it need to focus its efforts on? Was it local or regional government or national government? Snow change to stop the extraction of the peat.
Yeah.
Who did it need to focus its campaigning efforts on?
Yeah, well, the media was very much involved. So they got a lot of media attention, so then there was public pressure. And then, so in the end, the peat mining company said, like, okay, we give up. But of course, there were the environmental authorities that were.
So public awareness was really, really important.
Yes.
And how does the restoration process work? So what did you do exactly?
Yeah, so it was like a bunch of meetings with the villagers to kind of see what should be done, and then because it's also together with the river, there were, for example, where have the fish been spawning? Like, we restore these spawning areas so that the fish have healthier habitats, and then also like to have kind of to have all the hopes of the people secured, so that, for example, there's local hunters, so they can still hunt certain species there, and everyone can use it as a recreational area. So it's kind of like so that everyone in the community knows what's going on, and it's done so that like everyone agrees that it's a good thing. And then we have our like a hydrology specialist who knows like very well how water works, and like he's in charge of the actual like physical like restoration. Like, okay, so we put water here, and then like, but of course like based on, because it because it's not like in its original state, kind of, because it's like a wetland and not like a peatland with like moss now, because you can't restore that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if that.
Yeah, and but you also mentioned that of course it's really important to involve local communities, to work with indigenous communities. So how do you collect like local knowledge, and how do you exchange this also within Snow Change and outside the organization?
Yeah. Well, so the collection process happens like by interviewing, and of course the people are always like, no one is forced to be interviewed, but it's always like according to their consent. And then all the tapes are stored, and then like written, and then there's been a book that has been published like from the Eastern Sami knowledge, and then, but about sharing the knowledge, it's, well, I mean, it depends on the case, and it depends whether the people want it to be shared or not. If it's like kind of sensitive information or not. But yeah, depending on the case. Yeah.
And do you have any examples, or has it ever happened that like local knowledge has been useful, for example, for an international campaign or an international purpose?
Well, nothing comes to my mind right now. Like, yeah, because it's not a.
It's more like for a local level, let's say.
Yes, yeah.
But I think extraction of peat around the world, certainly in other parts of Europe, so it does serve as a good example, really, of how destructive some of these industries can be, and perhaps not to restore it completely, but at least find and kind of create an environment in more greater harmony with nature. So it's great to have as an example.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the first time that in Finland a community managed to stop a peat mining company, and the first time that
If it can be done once, it can be done
Yeah,
again in other
exactly.
parts of the world.
Yeah. And the first time that a community-led restoration project started, where it was actually from the local community that it started. So it's quite a special case, at least in the Finnish context.
Yeah. And Ari, from the experience that you had, have you seen that on an international perspective also grassroots initiatives or local indigenous knowledge is somehow taken into consideration?
Yeah, I would say it's somehow taken into consideration in the sense that, of course, like everything, international organization try to give a space to indigenous people, to indigenous community. Also because it's known that it's super important, and indigenous knowledge actually could be the key to solving some problems. So, for example, during my internship, I joined a meeting with the executive secretary, which was listening young people from all over the world, from indigenous community. And I didn't expect that, so it was a pleasant surprise that actually she took the time to listen to those people. Then I don't know, after that conversation, what actually could be done, what actually, besides having a moment to listen to people, which is important, but then I don't actually know if action is taken, and I don't think so. Also, something that is usually said at COP, at the Conference of the Parties, which is the main conference of these agreements on climate change, that a seat at the table should be granted to more indigenous people, but also to people, to the civil society, because these negotiating tables are full of experts, of course, are full of people from governments and ministries. But if one more seat at this table would be granted to people that actually live in the contexts, maybe some solutions would be found also in a more quicker way, like more quickly. Because sometimes they negotiate days and days because they cannot find the solutions on the problems. But if you actually ask to someone that is living in those conditions, I think maybe you can find an answer quicker. So yes, it's maybe more of let's say, a way of dealing with also indigenous culture.
Because there are a few, I guess, legal. There's very little kind of legal jeopardy, really, for these organisations to listen or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Indeed. They are the organization. They have to lead the process, and they have to do it. So if they do it involving or not civil society, indigenous people, it's up to them. And if they just bring forward the process by listening to themselves, to their own ministry, to their own, I'm gonna say, white supremacy people, because at the end of the day, this is it. No one is actually gonna tell them they're not doing their job, because they are doing it. Yeah.
So it's another form of greenwashing, but by having these conversations, I'm just wondering. Are there any concrete examples in which those conversations, in some way, have influenced?
I mean,
policy and a direction?
I think I cannot give you a concrete example, but if we look, for example, at the COP, many speeches are given. There are many young activists that give speeches. Also, many activists, indigenous activists, they go there and give a speech. They are super inspirational, and I think those speeches are the most moving. And I don't understand how people don't just stand up and run to find solution, because if you listen to those words, at least I'm full of like yeah, or they also transmit you passion for what you should do. But we know that then the process doesn't go that way. So
Well, these things are very hard to measure, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because, as you say, it could be the transmission of an idea, of information, but also the passion. And slowly, if that does find its way around the world and people become engaged in more subtle ways, it might be a long-term
Yeah.
impact, but slowly, consciousness changes, and the way what people expect from their governments or politicians changes as well. So it's hard to measure,
it's hard to
but I'm
measure.
convinced it really is
Yeah,
important that those
absolutely.
young
Absolutely.
people send this message. Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree, and yes, of course, it's super important. It would be nice to see more action taken after that.
Yeah.
But also the Fridays for Future movement and all the young people that protest, that keep protesting. This is absolutely crucial, because it reminds people that we have to do something. Also, when the climate crisis topic goes down in the agenda, if these people keep talking and keep protesting, it's fundamental. Yes.
So if we could bring a message from the Refugees Network to the next COP, to the COP27, what would be our message?
Well, very hard task. I think the message is to keep engaging with the local community, with people that actually want to take action in your local network. Because it's such an overwhelming crisis, gives you overwhelming feeling. Also, I think that us young people or citizens need to find the community on our local level, to uplift ourselves, and to find a reason to engage in this crisis. So for me, it would be finding your local community and do what you can at your local level, because we cannot really do something at the big international level, because we see these processes here are also a bit blocked, are very high level. And also keep studying, keep learning, and really understand that your choices have an impact, and think about the impact they have. And we are voting tomorrow in Italy. Let's vote when we can. We have to say that. Let's use our right to vote also to steer the conversation and say what we want through our possibility to vote.
Nora, do you also have any recommendation either for the world leaders attending COP27 or also for each individual that is coming to Terra Madre, that is listening to our podcast? What can we do?
Yeah. Well, for the COP, for the world leaders, I would say that listen to indigenous peoples and also give power to indigenous peoples. Like, let them make decisions over their natural resources, because they're the only ones who have been living without destroying nature for millennia. So there must be something, and I feel like they have the wisdom that the Western world has lost, because we're so fixed with technology and intelligence, but actually what we need is wisdom, and wisdom is in nature. So that's the message for the leaders. And then for the individuals, I personally think that we should try to move from the individual to communities, because in the world of today, I think we're so focused on what the individual can do, like by themselves. So basically, the two options that we are given, like the power we are given to, is that we can act as consumers, or then we can vote. And of course, they are both important, but there's actually no real power in that. Because when you talk about food, for example, the power is with the agribusiness and with the retailers and the state. So there's very little in whether we buy this or that. So then my advice, or I don't know if it's an advice, but maybe to get together with people and start thinking like how can we change the structures and patterns of our local food consumption or distribution, so that many people would together kind of take action and like kind of try to grab the power over the food system. Like for example, what community supported agriculture or community supported fisheries, how people are doing them. So I would say like a little bit like get together and act together, and then like instead of the individual, focus on like systemic change.
Can I just ask one final question from me, really, which is that there's so many different sets of crises underway at the moment. So we've come out of the pandemic, we're still recovering from the pandemic, the energy crisis, cost of living crisis, war in Ukraine. Do you think that takes us into a situation where positive change is more likely because we need to see things so differently? Or actually, does it mean that the voices that need to be heard will not be heard because I guess we are in this crisis mode, governments are in crisis mode. So, for example, in Finland, with the border with Russia, perhaps if that was happening now, Snow Challenge would not have been heard because so much attention would have been placed on the immediate crisis. And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on where we are right now, the amount of, I guess, political energy that's being expended on these different crises. Is that an opportunity for change, or a risk that some of this hard work is going to fall on deaf ears?
Yeah, well, of course, it's a very challenging time, for example, to try to advocate for these things, like on, for example, national or international levels, when people are focused on the crisis. But I also think that, well, here we are living the crisis. I mean, I think that what we will experience will be a crisis after a crisis after a crisis, even though it's not something you want to say out loud, but I think so, and that's why I think that people should focus on their like local environment and local level to see what can come from there.
In a way, it makes local action even more important.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to say that I'm a bit scared of this question because the moment we are living, again, I'm talking about Italy, it's a very particular moment because I thought after the pandemic we had, also thanks to the European funds, a big chance of really recovering, but not only recovering the economy that went down because of the pandemic, but really investing those money in a green transition. And I saw hope. But then our government fell, and now again we are voting, and it looks like the far right is gonna take the government, and really the climate, at least, issue is not on the agenda at all. But and we're going back on defending basic principles and rights which we have given for granted. And so we were like, okay, when you have something even for granted, then you can think of the next crisis to solve. But then we are going backwards. So I had some hope. I'm really scared now, but I think that we cannot stop here. We have big opportunity. We still have those European funds because without funding you don't go anywhere. I hope that the organizations that are going to receive those funds are really going to achieve the targets that they need to achieve. We have some conditionality towards the European Union, so we need really to achieve something. So I have hope because I have to have it. On the other side, yes, I agree that we're going to experience a crisis after a crisis. But we really have to put our sleeves up.
Yeah, and again,
everyone.
Local action becomes so important, even just to help us have a sense of hope and optimism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and talking about local action and individual action, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. we're gonna record another episode of the Spin podcast here at Terra Madre, and we're really gonna talk about how individual choices affect positively or negatively the food system. So I invite everyone to tune in if you're connecting from far away, or to pass by if you're here in Terra Madre. And thank you so much, girls. Thank you so much, Ariana Lavazin and Nora Osari, for being here and for giving us this grassroots perspective and this global perspective. It was really, really nice, and also because you're very young, and I'm always super happy to see that young people really take action and give examples also to the others. Thank you so much, Dan Saladino, for co-hosting the
Thank you.
episode.
Fascinating hearing this, being involved in this conversation. So thank you.
Thanks. And then see you tomorrow morning in the next episode of the Spin podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we talk? I think we're still live. But yeah.
Hi, Valentina. How are you?
Did you stop the live?
I'm looking for the where to do it. Oh, here it is. Because tune went out.
It's
Welcome.
like a behind the scenes.
Yes.
Like now, this is the bonus section.
Exactly. Yeah. But so since